Welcome back to Ye Olde Foundry. I'm in the office right now because this portion of the video, or the segments of video, I don't know how you'd... This segment of the video will be done in here because I'll be gaining access to my computer, which is in front of me, and the pictures that are going to be in there. As is my, no, let me back up. Forget I even said that. What do you know about bells? No, I don't mean the retail store, but I'm talking about the signaling device. Like that. A bell. I bet you didn't know that these, the beginning of these happened about 4,000 years ago, over in China. The Chinese at the time were the big mucky mucks of the world. They had the most sophisticated society. They had the most inventions. They had the best, you might call it way of living as compared to the rest of the world at the time, 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago, I'm not even sure that the tribes known as the Celts had been established throughout Europe yet. I'll have to look that up sometime. Anyway, basically the, pardon me, the Europeans were basically still in just tribes, whereas the Chinese had already developed basically what they got now, minus the high tech that they're working with now. That's really given them a lot of bad environment over there. What we had like in LA, the smog and all that from all the industrial work that we've been doing. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let me get back on topic. Bells. Well, back in the archaeologists say about 4,000 years ago, the Chinese, who had already fully developed working with bronze, had started experimenting with making sounds with bronze. Apparently what they had done, other than just making panels and hitting the panels, which sounded like gongs, what we know as gongs nowadays, what they had done is they had made a box of these panels, somehow attached them to each other, maybe wiring them together, maybe sewing them together with leather. And what you had was a box with one side missing, okay? And they found that they could make sounds with that better than just the hitting the try that again. Almost got stuck on my tongue. Trying to hit one panel and making a tone. This was a lot better. It went farther. It made more noise. It made a sweeter sound. Okay, so they experimented with that, and then of course they had already they've known for quite some time by that time how to pour bronze. So they went from just five panels tied together to make a sound, to casting what looks like a bell, but square-ish bell. Okay, nothing like the round bell that we have here at the time. It was probably closer to something like this. If this was made out of bronze, it would make a better sound than that. But it was more of like a box with all sides except one opening, and then they would tap that and it would make a sound. I don't know if it was as good as this. Probably not, because the odds are very good that they didn't have finish panels. They were probably pretty thick, and they hit it hard, it would make a sound, okay? They evolved into squarish bells. They further evolved into almost round bells, but not quite, okay? And I'm sure that because this material that they were working with was still expensive to get, it was still expensive to melt, it was still expensive to cast. So there wasn't a lot of, by guess and by golly, experimentation unless somebody had some really good idea, you know, and then they would go by that. Well, they eventually had enough really good ideas that they settled on a round shape. Now, it wasn't necessarily the shape that we know in Europe, of Western civilization, I mean, whether it be like this kind of bell, or whether it be the larger bells that needed this kind of attachment device on the outside to hang them. On the inside, they would have clappers, which was basically nothing. Hold on a second. I have a clapper over here that I set aside. Okay. Well, this bell that I've been showing you is a bit of an inexpensive type bell made over in India. It still was cast. This one wasn't one of those real finish, because if you could see inside, way deep inside, let's see if I can get some. You can see the unmachined portion of a cast bell way down inside, okay? And this was their clapper, which basically is nothing but a metal ball on the end of a string, on the end of a piece of wire, but it did the work, okay? A clapper normally is a cast, how would I describe that? It's a cast piece of bronze that has a ball at the end of it, usually a shank, and then on this end of it, it would have a eye. This isn't the best. Oh, there you go. It would have an eye on the end of the casting that you could hook on the underside. On the underside of this bell would be a hook, or even a solid ring that the clapper would have been attached to, and that would have been attached up here by some kind of a screw and a turn bolt or something. And, you know, then that was one of the ways that they were able to use a bell. But that was basically the ones you might notice that were in the European style. The big bronze bells that they had in China were basically shaped, I don't have anything, okay, could be more shaped more like that, hollow underneath, with a hanging device kind of like this, but they would hit it on the outside out here with either a handheld mallet, or if it was big enough, they would have a piece of timber hanging from some ropes, and that you could just grab it, whether you were a priest or a monk or a city official or whatever. You would take the handles on this big piece of timber and, you know, get it going, and then let it hit it, and it would make a large resonating sound come out of it. Very nice, very, very nice devices that were invented. Now, this was a big deal back then. Keep in mind, this was they were still working with a new material, bronze, a metal, just plain metal, was a new material, and they were making great strides in its usage. Okay, this, however, was uniquely Chinese at the time, making a bell out of the bronze, expensive material, bronze. And at first, the bells, when they were put into use, were used to signal people, whether it's signaling workers that was the end of their work cycle. You know, that was the knockoff ship's work, in other words, time to go home. Or they might have been signaling people, hey, the bad guys are coming over the hill, everybody grab a spear, kind of thing. You know, there's some, whatever they needed to try and get everybody's attention to do, they would use the bells, okay? And not necessarily great big bells, because don't forget, great big bells, it cost even more than just the handheld bells, or the bells that were probably about so big around, about so tall, and could be mounted at a gate or mounted on a sentry post, you know, where somebody could see it things far away and hit it and tell everybody that the bad guys are coming. You know, they didn't have the huge ones, certainly not right away. But the ones, you know, it was a unique sound, okay? Nothing else in nature made that sound. The birds, while, you know, very beautiful sounding, did not make a sound like that. Wood hitting rocks didn't make that sound. Rocks hitting rocks didn't make that sound. There's nothing in nature that made that sound. So this was one of those things that was extremely important to the people back then. They were making a sound that they believed was under the purview of the gods. Okay? It wasn't so much they thought that they were absconding with God's, the God's property. They believed, certainly, that the gods handed this information down to the inventors so that they could have this new, wonderful sound that no tribe had ever heard of before, no city dweller had ever heard of before. Okay? It was the most beautiful representation of a sound that had ever been manufactured before. Okay? And so once some people were getting used to the idea that they had permission from the gods to have this, guess who absconded with the idea that it was their property? The religious caste, of course. The priests, the Buddhist monks. Was it the monks? Well, mostly the religious caste in the Chinese society said that, you know, this came from the gods. We are the representative of the gods. We want the bells. Okay. Well, people back then were still suspicious enough to believe that they were the mouthpieces of the gods, and so had to obey them. Okay? Back then it was a lot simpler. It wasn't you obey the priest or you go to hell kind of thing. No, it was you obey the priest or one of the gods will send a tiger to kill you kind of thing. Or drop a large rock on your head kind of thing. Or drown you when you're out to sea kind of thing. Okay? There was a lot more dangers being corralled by a lot more gods in their society than in the Christian society. And so there was a lot more to fear. All right, so the religious caste for many lifetimes were the ones who basically had the power over the people, and even the nobles wanted to make certain that they didn't go against the will of the gods, so they deferred that portion of their life to the religious caste. But in time, some of the nobles said, okay, hey, look, you know, we want to worship the gods too. We want some bells also. And seeing as how we're the ones who are spending all the money on making the bells, we want some too. And so, you know, there came the status-seeking side of society. All the nobles had to have bells. And if you had more money, you had bigger bells. Your bigger bells made bigger sound. Okay? You could hit it as hard as you wanted to, and your bell would make sound all across the city. Everybody would recognize that as your bell and bring that much more fame and fortune to your family. Okay? So, everybody wanted a bell. Just like about 1,000 years later, everybody wanted the wheel. Okay? You know, bells were developed, and eventually the metal workers in China settled on the most resonant, the prettiest sounding sound coming out of a bell, and that's called bell metal. We still know that bell metal, and I promise before the end of this video, I'm going to give you the formula for bell metal. You know, there's only two materials, or rather two elements that belong in this mix, and it's copper and tin. Okay? So, copper and tin at a certain precise mixture makes the best sound. Okay? At first, bells were used to signal people, which is what I already said. You know, the religious castes used the bells to represent the gods. I'm trying to catch up with my notes here. Not to be daunted, the nobles demanded to have the bells too. And from that point on, everybody wanted bells. The nobles wanted bells, the mayors of city wanted bells, everybody that had any status anywhere wanted bells. Supposed to be covered by a ship's bell, or if you're making an announcement while underway. Now, that's only 2 bells, and those bells, this portion of it, normally those bells were only about so big around. You didn't need to have a loud noisemaker, because you're going to have the microphone right by it, and it'll go everywhere anyway. The third bell that we always had on any of the tenders I was on was a bell that was on the main deck forward. Well, it was aft of the forecastle and forward of the whatever it is that was right there. You know, the first bit of compartment that might be right there. Now, what that, and it was a big one, okay? Those were, let's say, yeah, I'll say about that big around. Those openings were, oh, let's say, what is that, 24 inches? We'll pretend it's 24 inches because I don't have anything to, you know, measure it by. There's only one reason to use that bell. Now, if you're underway, well, one reason that I can think of offhand, when you're underway, you're going to have the best of weather, you're going to have the worst of weather, okay? That bell is mainly used when you roll into fog, okay? Fog deadens sound a lot, okay? You can't, well, you certainly can't see. And anywhere in that giant fog bank could be another small ship, a fishing vessel, somebody's yacht. It could be another Navy ship. Could be one of our opponent's Navy's ships. And you know, you don't want to run into anybody out there, because that's usually results in some kind of somebody's death and a lot of darn damage on the ship, whether it be your ship or their ship or boat. So you have 2 things that you may take advantage of when you're going through some really bad fog. You got the giant ship's bell that's on the forwardmost part of the ship, out of the way of the forecastle, where, you know, you've got all the chains and all that for the anchors. And you also have the ship's whistle. Now, the ship's whistle on any of the tenders I was on was a steam whistle, which made a very loud noise, okay? And it was at the highest point on the ship, which is like, say, 40 foot above, maybe 50 foot above the level of the water. So if you're looking into a fog bank, you know, you have something of a chance where that ship's whistle might be above the fog bank, and when you blow it, it'll be announcing to everybody in front of you, hey, there's a big ship right here, be careful, we might run into you, you know, look out. Okay? I'm not sure if radar is very much affected by that, but we had radar, and we still had to follow those protocol for fog. Okay? Now, that was another reason why we had a nice big bell. Right? So, in the Navy, we made bells too. Not often, but we did. In the Foundry, pardon me, I keep getting choked up. Oops, I'm gonna kill this thing here. Forgot I even had it on. In the Foundry, we had capability of pouring some larger stuff, but they generally, you know, the big bells on like that we had on the ship away up forward by the forecastle, we didn't have a pattern for that, and usually that was kind of farmed out to a local foundry that did have all the equipment, the material handling equipment that they needed to not only pour the amount of metal that was needed to make that bell, but also had enough of the molding material and boxes and hoists to be able to pick up, to preheat the bull ladles, to pick up the bull ladles, to pour the molten metal into the bull ladles, to pour the molds, and so forth and so on. We didn't have the room for storage for that on the ships, so generally we had smaller bells that we would make. And we had made in my career probably 3 or 4 bells. They were not for us that I recall, not for our ship that I recall, but usually somebody's ship, when getting underway, stored the ship's bell in the wrong place. Somebody dropped it and damaged it. Somebody stole it, or whatever, you know. So they needed to have a bell for the quick, okay, which we could make. That we could make, but it's not that easy to make them. Now, my biggest regret is that I never made myself one of the bells when we had the pattern. Okay, I really, I even have dreams. Like I'm back in the Foundry, and I purposely go up to the pattern shop to try and find the pattern for a bell. Okay, I really regret not making one of those bells, because that would be really nice to have. Well, I mean, it's not like it'd be stored out in the front and I'd be ringing the bell for raising the flag or anything. But those were something to have. It was very fun. It's like if you have the money, you can have a high dollar computer, or if you have the money, you can have a high dollar car. I would have liked to have had a bronze bell. Okay, so, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how to do these, to ram up and cast these bells. Okay, and then in a further video a little bit later, I'm going to actually take one of these, like I think I'm going to take this one, and ram it up and pour it out of aluminum. Now, there's several different ways that you can make it. All right, I'm going to pause the camera now. I'm going to get my whiteboard out, and then I'll draw the ways that I recall, you know, you can do it. I'm sure there's a dozen different ways with all the different materials you can use to make stuff. There's different ways to do it with those different materials, but I'll show you the way we did it on the ship, and I'll be right back. Okay, now what we're looking at right now is, most everybody can realize, you can see that the is a flask. Okay, you got a mold cavity in there, and you've got molding sand around whatever it is you're making, and this is a side view of it. Now, if I was to take away, you know, almost make a split of this for making a bell, you've got a couple of different ways of making a bell. Okay, This is going to be the, the floor of it. And shoot, I'm not a good artist, but I guess I can try and all right, so we're going to be going around here, let's say, and that, and that. That'll be the shape, basic shape of the bell, okay? This portion right here will be sitting on this sand, and well, when you first ram it up, okay, what this is the molding board, all right? In this instance, you'd be putting the molding board down, and you would take the flask, take the cope of the flask, put it on the molding board, and then ram all that sand around this, right? Then you turn it over, and you would then ram all this sand in, and you would ram in this portion right here. Am I even showing you anything? Well, is this on? Yes, it is. Well, my thing here is not. Okay, welcome back. What we had there was a failure to keep my eyes on the battery. My first inclination that something was wrong was my iPhone had stopped showing things. Okay, well, anyway, as I was about to say, this is half, it's like I cut this mold in half. I've already rammed this portion over the bell. This is going to be our example of the bell. And flipped it over, put the drag on here, and then rammed in all this green sand core that makes the inside shape of this, and then the rest of this rammed it up, okay? Remember, this is only one way of doing it, okay? What you're going to do, remember, this shape is what the sand is going to be following, okay? This kind of way of ramming it up is best done if you're going to pour materials that don't generate dross as much, okay? Not every material or not every metal generates as much dross as copper-based alloys like brass and bronze does. Brass and bronze, if you don't take steps to prevent turbulence when you're pouring your mold, will generate dross, and the material won't be like solid metal anymore. It'll look like oatmeal in certain spots, and in the spots that oatmeal is sitting, it won't be solid. And which, in most cases, if that's just a plaque you're making, no big deal. You can hide that. But if you're making a pump body, let's say, or a valve body, and they start to put pressure under it, because you didn't have solid metal at that one spot, that water is most likely going to start to squirt out the side of that where that was, whether it be the wall of the pump body or a portion of the valve body, okay? So you've got to get rid of any possibility of dross being informed because of turbulence when you're feeding the mold cavity. Aluminum and iron, however, generates a lot less dross. And so you have a little bit more capability to, you know, do it this way. Now, what'll be done, and I'm gonna be doing it this way because of the fact I basically right now I only use aluminum. I'm going to be pouring it in through the top. Okay. Make sure that I've got everything right there. Anyway, so then what you'll have is you'll have the sprue come into the top here, and your pouring basin will be right there, and it'll hit the top of this green sand core, and basically just, you know, if you're looking at it from the top, it'll hit there and flow in a lot of different directions and fill up that mold cavity quickly. But because it's going to be using this shape in here, okay, this shape, it's going to follow that hill. It's more of a gradual you know, decline, or not decline, but descension into the mold cavity. There's not a lot of turbulence going to be generated by that. So the fact that I'm using a material that doesn't generate a lot of dross, and the fact that I have it rammed up and it's where it's going to be hitting the top of this curvature, you know, and it's going to flow evenly. It's not going to drop any. It's not going to hit anything real hard. It'll fill that in, and it should look just fine. Okay. Now, for brass and bronze, let me turn this over. Well, I didn't know that the phone could do that too, turn you on and off like that. Anyway. Okay, now I've flipped everything over because the ram up technique on this, you know, this one is going to be to try and take care of the problem that we have with the brass and bronze making a lot of dross. We no longer have that. We're not pouring from directly into the mold cavity. Okay. So it's going to be rammed up. Here's the drag, and there's the cope. You're going to ram up the drag first, so that when you turn the drag over, you basically just have that. This is the body of the bell, okay? And then you turn it over. You put the cope on top. Now you've got to start ramming that up. You're going to have all this sand here, and this green sand core is going to be suspended from the cope. Problem: if you don't take advantage of all those mold supports that I showed you in that one video on mold supports, first thing you do when you try and lift this up is this, which will have no supports. This will be hanging from all this other sand, and that will crack right off, and this will fall. Okay? So basically you'll have, when you turn it over, this will be in this half, and all you'll have for the cope is a ragged piece of sand in the shape of a circle, and you'll have to do it all over again. Okay? So right now, what you're going to have to do is, while you're ramming this up, while this is in this shape, in this position, and you're starting to ram up sand in here nice and tight, okay, nice and hard, you're going to have to put supports in there to allow the rest of this mass to hold on to that and keep it from falling out. Now, there's several different things that you can do. For something this small, what I'm going to do is I believe I'm going to just make myself a soldier. Now, a soldier is a piece of wood. Make sure I'm still showing everybody. Hey, it's still on, yay. Basically, is a piece of wood. You have to ramp it up or make it shrink to fit whatever condition you're in. But the piece of wood is going to be, in this case, about like that. It will, let's say no more than an inch, or no bigger around than your thumb, let's say, for this size, okay? And the reason why is it called a soldier? Because what's a soldier do when they're in a big parade, and everybody said, hey, stop, and they all stop, and they're not going to be leaning on their guns and all that stuff. They're going to be standing at attention. Well, this looks like a person standing at attention, okay? So you're not going to just ram up a piece of stick inside there, because this could just slide off this stick, right? What you want to do is you want to cut grooves in here, okay? Cut a groove, cut numerous grooves, as many grooves as you want to put in there. And if I'm looking at it from the side, it'll be like that. Okay? And you do it all the way around, all four sides, so that the sand can be rammed into this area right here, okay? And all of this out here will be bonded with this, and if you have enough of these, it'll keep this, or rather keep that, from slipping off of that, okay? There's another thing you can do. Let me get rid of this stuff. There is something called a gagger, G-A-G-G-E-R. Okay? It's usually a piece of metal, a rod. It could be cast too if you were in a big enough foundry that you could take the time to cast these to cast metal. What is this doing over here? And what you do is you get a piece of, it's going to be an L-shaped piece of metal, okay? You ram it up, and then up here will be a couple of blocks of wood, and let's get you out of the way, be a little better. And your piece of metal will come up as another L, and this portion, well, it's too big. Okay, I'll do it the other way. You have probably another piece of rod, or maybe even a piece of angle iron, that rest on these supports, and then this will have an L shape that rests on that support, okay? This will be rammed up around this all the way up to here, nice and tight, and then usually, you know, realistically what it is, this is a piece of 1/4-inch rod or thereabouts. You ram it up all the way up, and it's still straight up here. You put your pieces of wood on the side, you put your support bar on the side, and then because this is firmly packed in the sand, you bend that rod over this tightly, you know, to where it's touching it. And when it comes to pulling this apart, this gagger will be supporting this sand. And if you don't jerk it around and screw up, that will hold it. I'm not going to be using brass and bronze, so I'm not going to be worried about, you know, dross nearly as much as if I was pouring brass and bronze. If I was pouring brass and bronze, I would go with this, okay? Now, why is that? Well, not only, I mean, it's a pain in the butt to have to use mold supports and get everything just right, and ram it up just right, and all that stuff. But I'll show you. I got some mosquitoes in here. I'll show you why with a bigger cross section. Okay, now everybody that's been paying attention in class, let's say, knows that you have the pure metal, and then you have dross, and hopefully you don't have slag, but that would be like for something like iron and steel. But for brass and bronze, you have two things that's going to be your metal. You're going to have solid bronze or brass, and then you're going to have dross, which is brass and bronze combined with hydrogen or the atmosphere. Okay? Let's see if I can do this good enough. It's not going to be pretty, but I might be able to, now that I've got something to go by, I might be able to do that. Okay. Now here's the green sand core. Okay. Now up here it'll have been supported by all this other sand up here. So I should just make it a ragged line. Okay. Now, one thing I didn't, well, I can do it now. One thing I didn't tell you about before is how are we pouring it in here, okay? The other one, we just shot a hole into the top of this, let it hit that, and pour down here and fill this up. And then maybe you might have a riser up here to keep this from being shrunk. This one is going to be like our other molds, basically. See if I can do it good enough. Here's our green sand core. Here's our gap. And then what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be making a runner. Okay. And here's the splash basin. And there's the sprue as we're looking at it from the top. Now, usually on these, if it's small enough, you can do just 2 ingates, but if usually we wound up doing more than that. We would go around here, and you would go around here. So we at a 90-degree angle, we would have the ingates here. 90-degree angle, ingates here. 90 degrees here. And then the same thing about there. Okay? So you pour it. You pour it. It follows the runner. Any dross that you might have generated down here at the splash basin gets pushed to the end of the runners. That's why these are as long as they are. Fills up the runners and goes into the ingates. Okay. And starts filling up the mold cavity. all right? And you could do it one of two ways. You could go ahead and make the runners and then cut the ingates from the runner to go into the side of the bell, okay? That's the side of the bell. Or what you could do is you could, and I would suggest this because it would give you a better result. There's your runner side. This is side view, by the way, just in case. Like if I took this and turn it on its side and cut it to where we could see it. You're filling this up. It fills up. And there's a top gate. It's an in gate, but it's on top of the parting line, rather than below the parting line where the runner would be. And you know what the parting line is, I hope, by this time. It's the portion of the mold that the cope and the drag make when they're together, okay? So, if I was doing this, I would make sure everything was all pushed to the end, down in here, all the dross that might have generated, and then we would have pure metal entering this. Now, because this is going to be pouring in, hitting here, rolling down this, and this is the mold cavity, by the way. It would be pouring into here, hitting there, which is not very big, so it's not likely to give you very much turbulence, but it would follow this curvature all the way down and come around, and it would hit and splash. You might get a little bit of curvature here. Now, or rather not curvature, but dross there because of the splashing when they come together. Now, here's the chief advantage of doing it this way. The disadvantage is that you're always having to support this. Chief advantage is that the molten metal, the solid, pure molten alloy that you're trying to make this bell out of, will displace the dross as a body of water would displace wood, you know, light wood, not soaked wood, but light wood, and the wood would float to the top. So if it's down here and it's generating, it'll float real quickly, and then the dross, it might come up and form against that. It might come up, form against that, and everywhere along this pattern, or rather this mold cavity, the stuff will rise up against the end wall, the inside wall, this wall in here. Presumably you're not going to have that much dross, and presumably the dross that you do have is not going to all be in one spot. It might be scattered throughout, okay? See, even the material, that if you had a piece of dross right here, it's still going to be displaced by the solid, denser molten metal, and it'll go up and deposit itself here, okay? Everywhere that dross is, it's got the possibility of hitting the inside curvature of this and sticking or staying, being displaced, pushed against that green sand core by the pure metal, okay? That is the only reason that I would put so much effort into doing it this way, is because you want all the pure, beautiful metal on the outside, so that you can machine this, or you can buff this, or you can even antique it, okay? Antiquing it, well, it's basically making it look like it's really old, and having some defects on the outside would have little effect on the overall look. It would certainly make it look older, okay? So this is the reason why. Now, you got other ways that you can do this. I'm using green sand. I'm going to be using green sand, And so this is the choices I'm going to be using with green sand. If you use CO2 sand, you could do it many different ways. CO2 sand, sodium silicate. Let's see if I can. If you were using sodium silicate as your molding material, you could make this entire thing, all right, this entire thing up here be a core, and all of this digging that you're going to do down here in this portion, you would dig that all out and smooth it out before you put the CO2 gas on it. And you know, it's a little easier that way, because you know, this is going to be so strong that that you wouldn't need the supports on this. You puncture the holes all the way down. That's going to let the gas go down here and freeze this up into almost rock hard, you know, material, and this won't detach from that. That's the good news. The bad news is this is going to be so hard that the collapsibility of this core just might not be there. Okay? Remember that when the material is solidifying, it's not as strong as it's going to ultimately be. Now you remember the appearance of the big crack on the Liberty Bell. There were some people that said that that was because of a design flaw. Well, from a molder's perspective, what happened is that the core that they made in there was so tough that when the bell was formed, oh criminy, I'm not even making a bell shape. When the bell was formed, when it was solidifying, manufactured a crack on the side because it didn't have enough strength to stay together, because that core on the inside couldn't collapse under the strength of the solidifying metal. Okay, it formed that crack. And when they said that I think the story goes that when somebody rang it, it cracked right then. Well, it could have been. It could have been that it had a paper-thin piece of good metal over that crack, and that the vibration from the gong, or rather the clapper hitting it, shattered that little thin piece of metal, and the crack appeared. I would bet. I would bet my reputation that it was the core not collapsing as it should have been, not crunching in as it should, that forced that crack to generate on the Liberty Bell. Okay. Now, shoot, there was other things I wanted to say. Let's see if I can remember them as I'm erasing these. I think I may have. Oh yeah, that's right. This one last thing. You could, in a backyard setting like you're probably going to be working, you could make yourself a core out of regular core sand, making this portion here. Let's see if I can get this. Well, this is a core. Okay, let's turn it on its side. Let's see if I can. Let's see, does that show? Oh my goodness. Let's see, are you still on? Yes, you are. I'm going to have to assume that you can see this. Okay. Let's see if I can get this junk out of the way and give you a better idea of what it's going to look like. All right. You can make yourself a core out of regular core sand. You would stuff this in here, right? and then in the sand itself, make yourself, that'll be a little hard. I guess you could go ahead and get yourself make yourself a core box by making yourself making yourself a frame and having this sit off the base of the frame, you know, away from the bottom, like not sitting here, but up a little bit, and letting the plaster of Paris form around this, and pull this out, and then make yourself. You need a core print, okay? Something that's not just this, because if it was just this in here, you'd still have to have the core supports. But if you made something that made a ledge right here and a ledge here that this core print would be supported, or rather this core would be supported by this sand out here, that this could be a core, and you could have it sitting like this, and you just put it in there in the mold cavity. This is gone. You put the core in there, and then you put the cope on top of it. Or you could make a core that shape and ram it up with the core inside this, and this would be your parting line. You know, there's different ways of doing it, okay? But that's overly difficult to do. I wouldn't, I mean, if you had all the materials you needed and you had all the time in the world to do it, yeah, you could do it. Okay? Plaster of Paris, you can do it, but you just have to make sure it's absolutely as dry as the Mojave before you pour metal into it. You could use resin and make a bell with resin. It's the same thing, though. You got to watch out for collapsibility in your core, because resin turns rock hard also, and it's whatever material you use to make the core inside the bell, it's got to be collapsible. Okay, now this is what we used to use in the Navy. We had a pattern, okay? But there's more than one way of making a bell, or basically any other shape that's simple and is uniform throughout. I'm going to show you some pictures here of a guy making a big bell. This is a big bell. It's not a huge bell, but it's a big bell. This fella, what he does is he gets a pile of old bricks, okay, and he makes a general shape. You know, the bricks. It's not like he's going to carve those into the inside of the core. No, that's basically just the core of his core. Makes this basic shape. Now he's got all these crevices and all these steps to fill in. He'll get a formula that not only uses mud, but also they used to go out and get horse manure or cow manure and mix it in with their mud. And why? Well, because cow manure and horse manure still has either grass or hay inside the manure, and those pieces of grass and hay that haven't been digested act as, I don't know, supports on that material. It doesn't allow it to crack and fall away because it's got all those fingers of straw or fingers of grass in there that ties it together. Okay, like the Indians that made those clay bricks that would the Pueblo Indians. Can't recall. Sorry if I got that wrong. Sorry if I got that wrong. But they would not only mix clay together, but they would stomp in straw, and that would keep the clay bricks from separating and becoming worthless. Same thing happens with the old style in Britain and Europe, bell making. They would make the core out of almost anything, and it used up bricks from refractory, jobs to reline a furnace, stones, pieces of wood, anything that would make the core, and then they would pack this clay / horse manure / cow manure and other things, and I know there's other things, I'm just not remembering them, around that, filling in all the cracks and crevices, and they would pack in so much that it would be bigger than the core would be. This is they're forming right now. I'm telling you, they're forming the core for the bell. Now what they do, after they've got that all packed in and it's kind of almost starting to get hard, they'll take what's called a sweep. Now the sweep, it's like, imagine you're sweeping the ground with a broom, okay? And in this case, though, you're going to have a piece of wood that one surface of it follows the curvature of the inside of the bell that you want to form, okay? Up here at the very top, where the top of the bell would be, you have a hole that a piece of rod, that this will fit over a piece of rod that the bell maker has molded into the top of this core. He puts it on it, and he takes it and he sweeps around the curvature. Okay, the top of it is on the top of this core and being steadied by this rod that he rammed up in the length of it. The bottom of this is following a follow board or a molding board, okay, so that it can easily work its way around. All right, you're probably going to be, well, you'll be seeing now. Hopefully I'll be putting these pictures over my voice. So he packs it, he forms it with your basic formation with the sweep, and then he puts a coating on the outside of that so that it becomes smooth, and then that's the core. Okay, they put that in the bottom of the drag. They put that on the drag, and then the cope they make out of regular molding sand. As far as I know, they make it out of regular molding sand, and that's where all the decorative stuff is imprinted on the inside. And it's they get all that cleaned up, and they punch a hole in the top big enough for that metal to be poured pretty quick, and they clamp it down and pour the molten metal, and they break it out, and often they'll put it all through a lathe, take the first 1/16 of an inch off the top to get it nice and smooth, and I don't know, whatever it was they needed to do for their product, they'll do it. I'm not sure. If it's just going to be a smooth thing on the outside, somebody didn't want to spend for a lot of decorations, it can be easily done on a lathe. Okay? So, I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah. And, of course, you're always going to have the inspector. Now, these pictures that I'm showing you, or have shown you by this time, I believe they're from Great Britain. I think so. If I remember rightly, they're from Great Britain. It looks like it. But the Europeans, and they made, the Britons back in the day, Britain was known as the Ringing Isle for all the bells that they had. Okay? Was it the Ringing Isle? That sounds like it. Sounds like the phrase I heard. But it was mainly because of all the bells. Everybody had bells. Everybody wanted bells. The churches had grand bells ringing, time for all the faithful to come in for Mass or whatever ceremony they were going to perform. People getting married would have the bells ringing out to celebrate the event. Some people would have bells made out of cast iron. It still rings. It's not as beautiful, but it's also not as expensive. And those cast iron bells might call their cows home for milking. Okay, everything that I said before, what they were used for the same thing in Great Britain, and everybody wanted a bell. So it became inexpensive enough to where almost everybody had a bell. Okay, even the town crier. Remember the town crier, the guy who was responsible for telling everybody in town the new rules and regulations of that town, and the news from afar. He would be walking through town, ringing his handheld bell, which was probably about that size. Ding, 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 and getting everybody's attention. And he would be there in the city square telling everybody the news. Okay, well, the next video, which might happen in a few days, providing my wife doesn't grab me again for another honeydew list, I'll be taking this, or will I be taking this? I'm not real sure. I haven't made up my mind yet. This looks like it's more apt to be rammed up easier. This is the one I made on my 3D printer. Maybe I'll go with this. Anyway, I'll be making a few of these, and what my plan is to make it to where I have wind chimes. They crash against each other, or I'll have something in between them that's being pushed by the wind, and dang, 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 dang. Okay? It's hard for me to think of projects that I can show you. I mean, there's not that many things I need to make. But I've always wanted to make some bells. And that's one thing I could do, is make wind chimes. Okay? So, without any further ado, I'll go ahead and stop this now and check it out, make sure that it didn't bomb on me in the middle of everything, and get it put online. For those of you that are interested in the foundry trade, thank you for watching. I really, really want you to go ahead and start from the first video. And here's the reason why. Not just because I thought the first video was the greatest or anything. It probably wasn't. Very much not. But every video that I made built on the last one. Okay? If you jump ahead, you might be missing a vital clue on how did this happen. Right? How did this happen? Then you'd have to back up. Just start from number one and you'll work your way forward, okay? You'll be happy you did. And you will have more information up here than a great deal of your compatriots trying to make stuff out of molten metal that are around you, all right? Thank you for watching. Please give a thumbs up. I'm going to sound like everybody else. Please give a thumbs up if you like it. Pass the word to those of you who really want to learn how to make stuff with molds and furnaces. And if you have a thumbs down, tell me what's wrong. Okay? Tell me what I did wrong. Keep in mind that I already know that I'm not a professional videographer, and I probably have made some very glaring mistakes. But I'll be happy to address the, complaints that you might have about what I do or what I didn't say. Don't forget, if you have any questions, if I've left, it's been more than one time that I've branched off and forgot to finish another thought. Okay, I've branched off and forgot that. So please, if you have any questions, absolutely ask the questions, and I will, as quickly as possible, probably very soon after you've asked the question, answer your question to the best of my ability. And if I don't know it off the top of my head, I'll look it up. All right? For those of you watching, thank you very much. And for those of you my compatriots, my molder ladies and guys, pattern makers also, Liberty Call.